people heard, one of, I think Scott and Debbie mentioned a few times the concept of DocuSign or electronic/digital signatures. And until I had a conversation with Ed Kemmerer about the difference between digital versus electronic signatures, I had no idea there was a difference. And I had no idea the FAA actually had changed its position on what is acceptable, what isn't acceptable. And I found the whole conversation confusing. So Ed, I was hoping you might be able to, shed a little light and clarity on, first of all, the difference between the two, and secondly, what does the FAA accept? And, just fundamentally, is DocuSign legal here in the U.S. and is it legal in other jurisdictions? So over to you, Ed.
Yeah, those are all topics that we'll touch on. But before we even do that, I think DocuSign electronic or e-signatures really are a good thing. This is an innovation and a development that's really helped. We've all had the Oklahoma City weather situation a couple of weeks ago where things were shut down, and I think digital signing allowed the folks out there to do more with a registry that was shut down. They couldn't have done other times. We've all remember the days when we were racing off to the FedEx box, and then when we missed it, finding out where the FedEx drop-off was at the airport and calling couriers and all sorts of things like that. And then just those famous Steve Martin, I forgot moments where you just didn't get something out. And then you realize that, if you didn't get that out that night, you were going to blow the whole closing. Well, digital signatures can really help with that. So let's talk about the FAA registry and some of the rules and regulations. That deliciously ironic moment on April Fool's Day a few years ago when the FAA announced that they were bursting into the 21st century and accepting digital signatures kind of came as a shock to everyone. Nobody really, I don't think anybody expected it, but all of a sudden there was this brave new world of electronic signatures. And the current rules at the FAA allow for, we used to have the rule, if it wasn't blue ink, and with very, very few exceptions, it wouldn't be accepted. You needed wet signatures on all the documents. Now we've got digital signatures as being allowed. And as Ford alluded to a couple of moments ago, there are differences in what we would call e-signatures. There are electronic signatures and digital signatures. And the FAA only accepts digital signatures, not just plain electronic signatures. And the difference, without getting into the technology of it, really comes down to how secure are they and how verifiable are those signatures. Two leading providers out there are DocuSign, which has almost become like the Kleenex, word that everybody uses for this. I mean, that is a trademark. The DocuSign documents, if it's digital, it will have a lock and shield on the digital signature, so you'll know that. And then the other major provider out there is Adobe Sign. My understanding is that Adobe Sign only has digital signatures. They don't have a lower level. So it's always important, if you're using your own system, if you're relying on a third-party provider, to ascertain, what level of e-signature you're dealing with.
That means I can't just take a picture of my signature and insert it in a PDF and recombine it and send it off as a PDF and say, here, it's signed?
Only if it's an LLC statement. That's about it. The old PDFs and faxes and emails saying, hey, I really did sign that, I'll get it to you tomorrow. It doesn't work. So they've been very clear about what they will accept and what they won't accept. So
I assume that's a more expensive version of DocuSign, and DocuSign somehow is in cahoots with the FAA. I'm being a little, facetious here, but I do assume you have to pay for that. Is really my question.
It is my understanding that it is an upgrade, and that not everyone has upgraded. So that it is important to check to make sure that you are using an actual digital.
So therefore, just because you're using DocuSign doesn't mean you're actually doing it the right way for the FAA purposes.
That's right. You got to look for that little lock and shield logo that appears on it. As Scott mentioned and Debbie mentioned earlier, there are filing boxes now at the FAA where they've got priority and non-priority boxes, and the time for pickup changes. So a lot of people are filing that way. Digital signatures are accepted in the filing boxes. Electronic filings are something that's new. The filing box more or less is the COVID response to what used to be the FAA filing window. With COVID, the FAA allowed for electronic filings, which is almost an extension of the old mailbox rule, where you could mail documents in. Now you can email documents in, but that is a digital signature only model. So you absolutely got to have that, and blue ink or wet ink signatures are not accepted. So PDF, anything that is an e-signature alternative exclusively. So if you're a lender, what do you do to find out what your policies are and what your position is going to be with respect to e-signatures? First, you ought to be checking internally to find out what your own institutional policies are. And I would suggest the best place to start is with your general counsel's office, maybe with your compliance office. You may find that your bank has rules as to what they will and won't accept. There are also regulatory considerations. I'm not really completely up to speed on this, but I understand that there are some considerations that are larger than the institution with respect to when electronic signatures can be accepted. You've got to navigate what could appear to be inconsistent internal policies and procedures. I've come across a number of banks that have told me that, well, they accept electronic or e-signatures in the real estate department, but they don't accept it on the commercial loan side. And, you know, it's not always obvious what the rhyme or reason for that is, but it's something that you've got to ascertain internally and figure out, you know, what you can and can't do from an institutional policy perspective. And then finally, you know, once you've determined what your limits are, you got to find your own comfort zone. Are you comfortable using something other than what you've always used? Are you comfortable with electronic signatures? So you got to move in that direction. Then moving to external factors, the FAA really just tells you, it sets forth rules for perfection. It doesn't set forth rules for what is a valid document or not, other than, you know, what signatures they require. So whether an electronic signature is valid or not is determined by the law of the place of delivery of the document. And what does that mean? You've got a number of alternatives in any transaction that you've got. You might want to check the bank headquarters or the place where the document was signed on behalf of the bank, the borrower's place of delivery of the documents. And then it's also a good idea. Most contracts, most aviation loan and security agreements have a governing law clause. So you might also want to check with that, even though that's not exactly what the FAA says they will look to. It's a good idea to make sure that you're in compliance with your governing law provisions. This is one of those areas where it pays to go back and review your existing contracts. Many contracts had kind of this archaic language in it that said that the contract will deem to be accepted when the documents are accepted or delivered to the bank, and that they're deemed delivered at that place. You might want to revisit that language in light of how digital signatures are now being viewed by the FAA. So you've got to adjust and adapt. And then I would say that even if you do get comfortable with electronic signatures of one shape or another, you might want to consider following up with, you know, classic blue ink wet signatures on some critical documents. I've seen a number of lenders saying, yeah, we'll accept it on all the ancillary documents, the pay proceeds letters, even the loan and security agreement. But when it comes to the note, we want to have a wet or blue ink signature. So something to check and something to consider. So some e-signature issues. You always want to confirm, as I mentioned before, that the documents are in fact digitally signed, not just electronically signed. The FAA can reject documents with electronic signatures. They could go back and cancel filings with just electronic signatures. I don't know that that has happened with any kind of great regularity, but it's possible. It does create some question about documents that have actually been accepted and filed and recorded that were just electronically signed. To my knowledge, the FAA hasn't gone back, and the title companies and council in Oklahoma City are not taking exception to documents like that in their searches and opinions. But it's a matter of a little bit of concern. There's some concern with unauthorized access. So, for example, CEO is the person that's supposed to sign the document. He or she is traveling. They don't have access to their laptop, and they call up their trusted assistant who does have access to their email account and says, "Hey, I got this, digital document coming in. Would you go in and approve everything for me?" Well, no one on the receiving end of that can tell what just happened. And if you ever do get into a dispute down the road, there could be some question as to whether there was due authorization and whether that document was truly signed by an authorized signatory or officer of the company. Going back to the e-filings, there are some reports of them getting lost. From what I understand, there's no fatalities there, but there were some anxious moments while those were sorted out. There are some enforceability issues in litigation. Just because the FAA accepts it doesn't necessarily mean that a court, when called upon to determine the validity of the document, will accept the document. And the good news on this one is that manual changes to digital documents are still okay. So that if you incorrectly put the title for the signatory as member when they are in fact a manager, or you transpose a digit in the serial number, our good friends in Oklahoma City can come to our rescue, as they always do, and correct that manually, and it's still allowed.
Oh, Ed, quick question. So say, we're closing a transaction with a Canadian citizen who's a resident of a European country. The aircraft is being registered in another European country, and the loan's being made to an SPV in the Virgin Islands. Oh, yes, and there's a member who's also an American citizen being signed here. Is DocuSign good in all those places, or is this, caveat emptor, buyer beware situation?
Yeah, you really have to look to the place where the document is being delivered. You look to the law of it, and you may have to look at all of those, and it may be, it may be a valid document for purposes of getting it filed at the FAA, but that's where you get into issues of enforceability. So you might have to chase that borrower in, the country where their SPV is in the Caribbean somewhere, and that Caribbean court may take a different view of how valid it is. So it is, it's a good law school hypothetical, and it's something that you really should be looking into. We do kind of tend to just take it for granted, but I don't think that that's necessarily a good idea anymore. So, this creates a lot of timing issues. As Scott and Debbie indicated before, you're dropping documents into a filing bin. People are taking the position that, they're recording the time that they drop it into the bin. That's the time that's being assigned to documents, and the FAA is not really pushing real hard on that, but we've all become acquainted with the classic chicken and egg problem that we have in many deals where there's an existing lender with a lien, doesn't want to release their lien until they've been paid, and we've got a new lender coming in and doesn't want to release their money until they've got a registered lien. So as one practitioner in Oklahoma City told me recently, he says, we now have a bigger leap of faith than ever before. The system has always worked for us, and we've relied on the norms and practices that we've all gotten comfortable with in Oklahoma City, and the skill of the practitioners that we all rely on. But it's a little bit of a bigger leap now. Filing box delays. What I've been told is that historically, you have a pretty good idea when you went to the filing window of if a document was submitted 5 or 10 minutes before, you probably know about it. So if there was a late lien getting filed against your aircraft, it's going to show up when they do their last minute search. You know, when you're on the closing call and they just say, we've just checked the registry and the record is clear. You know, they're basically telling you nothing's happened recently. With the filing box, it's not as obvious. There could be 55 minutes worth of documents in that filing box before you, and one of them may affect your aircraft. And there's really no way to
Hey,
know.
Ed, I hate to interrupt you, but you're beginning to sound like you're, you know, about 20 leagues underwater. So, you believe it or not, and I hate also, I hate to say it, we're running out of time, and I don't want to, and I encourage everybody to take a look into these issues on their own. But unfortunately, I think we need to move on. But you've covered most of the important topics, I think, related to this. You know, which is make sure you have a conversation with your counsel and FAA counsel if you have any questions on this, because I suspect that, and everybody's hopefully is going to nod their heads, that we haven't seen the last of interpretations coming out of the FAA on how all of this is going to be handled. And we would expect to see some further clarifications, particularly as rulemaking comes out on a lot more of these issues. So thank you, Ed.